My husband was in the Air Force, and I transferred in 1966, and I came here and I started working in contracting. And back then, I believe I started as a stenographer and a clerk and progressed through the ranks. And after I'd been here for a while, I left. I was gone for about 8 years, raising my family, and I came back in the early 80s. Um, from the time that I left in the 60s until I came back in the 80s, things had changed tremendously. If you can imagine, when I came in 1966 and when you walked into the building, there were open bays. You could see everybody. I saw a bay full of basically white males. And in the supervisory part, again, at that level, they were basically white males. I knew that I was in a different culture. I knew that it was a plantation. There was no getting around that. But from how I was treated, I can't say that I was treated a lot differently than some of the other people. There were typewriters. You did have to clock in and out. Again, an open environment. The good thing about the open environment, you got to see and talk to people as you walked up and down the aisle. I remember the cards, the huge things that they called a computer at the time. And heavens forbid, I didn't work in that area, but if you had your cards all ready to put into the computer and you dropped the box, that was a day's work that you had to do all over again. When I first came, solicitations were basically either delivered by hand by the vendor or they were delivered by mail. And of course, I'm sure they had all of the security involved to make sure that it got here on time. When I left, of course, things were more automated versus the manual way that we used to do them. Once the solicitations came in, inputting them in and writing up a worksheet. I remember sitting there working. You had all of these little blanks you had to fill in manually, pencil and pen, filling out the worksheets to make an award. And then once I finished it, if I'm the buyer, then I would pass it on to the contracting officer, and that person would take his or her pen and go over to make sure that every thing that's required on that document was required and was all done manually, pencil and pen. When I came here, this was the Defense General Supply Center, and I kind of knew the history of it because I hadn't been here very long when I started giving the command briefing, so I knew about the elk and how the elk got here. I knew how they acquired the land in 1942 from the Bellwood brothers. But what I remembered most in coming into this gate was quarters one. As you walked into this gate, there was quarters one sitting majestically on the hill, and that's where the commander and his family lived. When I was here, it was a real officers club. And that's where you could invite your friends over for dinner at the evenings, and they would have the brunches, and where you could get together to discuss things after work. And when the Officers Club went away, again, near and dear to my heart, I said, I cannot believe the Officers Club is gone. Going back to, I would say, Desert Storm, Desert Shield, I remember the push to get sandbags, lots of sandbags. And I guess the challenge was just getting enough of them, getting the raw material, because even a sandbag, you had to go through certain inspections. You can't get a sandbag when you fill it, and all of a sudden a hole come in it. I still can remember all the people in Valdosta, Georgia, where we would get our sandbags from, and that was a big push. And then, of course, us being procurement and being an aviation center, we prided ourselves in supplying our servicemen with all of the right items that they needed for the major weapon systems. I had come in earlier when I had just come out of school, and I came in as a GS2, clerk typist clerk. And when I left, I was a GS14. I'm working in the command suite. We're going to talk about people in a minute, but I will tell you, Admiral Lippert hired me to be his executive staff officer. He had all of the characteristics of a leader. He was a role model. And he was a role model not just for the people in the command suite, but for everybody who worked on that center. Some of my fondest memories, and I always go back to people, and I mentioned Admiral Lippert. And the other person that I would like to mention, and I'm sure you will hear his name a lot around DLA, is Frank Lotz. Frank was a mentor. He was a person who cared for his people, and I remember him telling me that, Mary, your people are your greatest resources. You take care of your people, and everything else will take care of itself. I think that, especially for here in Richmond, we never forgot our social responsibility. It was more than just we're here on this base or this plantation doing what we do, but we also had a social responsibility to the people around us. And one situation that comes to mind, when we were building the Child Development Center, we uncovered 6 graves. And if you can think about today what happens when graves are uncovered, and these 6 graves happen to have been graves of African Americans. And back then, when African American graves were discovered, if nobody knew it, they just paved right over them, or they kind of shoved them away. When these graves were discovered, we went out. We did an extraordinary effort to find out who these people were. These were real people. They were a mother, a father, and children. It was a family. So it was important to us to find out, are there relatives? Are there ancestors here? Because clearly we had to reinter these people. We weren't going to just shove them away. So what we did, and I was one of the people who kind of took the lead on that, we went out to churches and we looked at the census data. We looked at the Chesterfield County Historical Society. We looked at the Chesterfield County Cemetery Society, trying to find out, trying to make some linkage, get names and trying to link these people that we knew around that area. We took it upon ourselves to be their family. And what we did here at Defense Supply Center Richmond, we planned a very, very nice reinterment ceremony. We had our African-American males who came in with their white gloves and their dark suits, who took these 6 little caskets with the bones and took them to their final resting place as we did the reinterment ceremony. And as you're leaving the center, if you go out the back gate, you will see a gated cemetery. And that gated cemetery looks just like the cemetery of the owners of this plantation, the Bellwoods. It looked just like that. And that's where we reinterred the remains of these 6 African Americans who, we don't know how they died, but they died here somehow on the center. And we thought that they should have a respectful reinterment because they deserved that. And we were their families. And that's something that sticks with me.